What is up, everybody? It's Animac here for AnimeUproar, and in this video we will be talking about Sword Art Online. Oh yeah! Now, we all know that there are a lot of people, especially in the anime YouTube community, who really hate SAO. But it is also true that there are a lot of fans of SAO who really love it. I've said this before, but I personally think that SAO is not nearly as bad as some people pretend it is. I mean, sure, hating on SAO gets lots of views on YouTube, but I've seen dozens of anime that were way worse than SAO. When Season 1 first came out and SAO blew up in popularity, you can definitely say that the show was overrated. But at this point, I would say that SAO is actually overhated. And even though there are many people who seem to hate SAO, it is becoming more and more likely that SAO and shows like it will be the future of anime in a few important ways. Whether you love or hate SAO, and I guess you could say that I both love and hate it because there are some aspects of SAO that I love and some that I do kinda hate. The popularity of Sword Art Online has had a significant impact on the anime industry, and more anime series seem to be deliberately following in the same footsteps as SAO. Because let's face it, they all want a taste of that sweet, sweet popularity. I will explain what I mean and why I personally both love and hate SAO at the same time, but before I get into it, if you enjoyed this type of content, you can leave a like to let me know. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This video will specifically address the SAO anime up to and including Motherrosario and the Ordinal Scale movie. But I will not spoil the Alicization arc, the Gun Gale Online spin-off, or the rest of the light novel for you, so if you're not caught up to those, no worries. Now, the one thing that I absolutely love about SAO, and the primary reason why I stuck with this series for so long, is that when you actually think about it, each arc of this series has a great premise. I'm a big fan of science fiction, and I've read a lot of classic and modern sci-fi. And I've also watched a ton of science fiction movies, TV shows, and anime. And believe it or not, the initial premise of each SAO arc has echoes of some of the most influential and critically acclaimed works of science fiction. Let's start with the very first arc in the story, the Aincrad Arc. The premise of this first arc is that a bunch of everyday people become trapped inside a new virtual reality game. They are unable to log out and leave the virtual world, and if they die in the game, they die in real life. When I first began watching SAO, I thought that this was an extremely interesting premise, and I absolutely loved the first episode of the anime. I thought it did a great job of setting up the world, and the ending of the first episode compelled me to keep watching to see what happens next. This idea of being trapped in a virtual reality-based game is certainly nothing new, and classic sci-fi franchises like Tron already explored the same territory decades ago. Not to mention that other anime franchises like .hack did it too. But I actually thought that SAO did a good job of modernizing this trapped in a virtual reality setting in the post-World of Warcraft era. A lot has been said about Kirito, the protagonist of SAO, being too overpowered. But I was willing to look past it in the first arc because the series cleverly established that Kirito was one of the 1000 beta testers for the original SAO game. So it made sense that since he had more experience playing it, Kirito would have an advantage over most other players in SAO. I'll save my issues with SAO, including the Aincrad arc, for a little bit later, but now let's talk about the second arc in the series, the Alfheim Arc. The premise of this arc is that after most of the surviving players of the original Sword Art Online game were able to log out successfully and wake up, some survivors of SAO, including Asuna, failed to wake up for some unknown reason. We later learned that Asuna's consciousness is being held captive inside Alfheim Online, the game that is the successor to SAO. And this is all part of a plan by Sugo Nobuyuki, who was able to hack into the SAO server and reroute the minds of the missing SAO players, so that he can use them as test subjects in his research on how to manipulate memories. Nobuyuki also intended to inherit Asuna's family fortune by persuading her father to let him marry Asuna while she is still unconscious. Now, I have no idea how this would even work, but maybe Japan has marriage laws that are more inclusive of the consciousness challenged? Anyway, this idea of hacking people's brains and manipulating their minds is another extremely cool sci-fi concept with a lot of potential, especially as modern technology continues to move towards virtual reality and cybernetic implants and enhancements. Just think of Ghost in the Shell and how heavily the idea of hacking a cybernetic brain plays into the story as a whole. Now, am I saying that SAO does as good of a job in handling these intriguing sci-fi concepts as Ghost in the Shell does? No, definitely not, and I will explain why. But now, let's look at the third arc, the Phantom Bullet arc. The premise is as follows. Within a shooter game called Gun Gale Online, those players who are killed by a specific individual known as Death Gun somehow end up dying in real life. Those who are shot in the game by Death Gun instantly disconnect from the game and turn up dead in real life a few days later. Here again we have a situation where the setup to the arc is incredibly interesting. We have a truly fascinating mystery in which the line between the fantasy world of the game and the real world is blurred, and we are desperately trying to figure out how it is possible for someone to kill a player in a game and also have that person instantly die in real life. This is not the same situation as with the Aincrad Arc, where all the players were trapped and everyone who died in the game died in real life. Instead, only this one mysterious villain called Death Gun has the ability to kill someone in the game and have them also die in real life. And I remember that I was personally extremely interested in figuring out how this was even possible. I also felt that this premise explored some very intriguing questions about the modern world and just how connected our online lives are to our physical lives. I mean, we all spend so much time on the internet interacting with all sorts of strangers, so much so that we sometimes forget that meeting the wrong person online can be pretty dangerous. And Death Gun is the living embodiment of that very thing. Again, this is another premise that I loved, a premise that kept me hooked and that made me think about the philosophical implications of our increasingly high-tech society, which is the effect that all good science fiction tends to have on me. Then we have Motherrosario, which is technically a side story rather than an independent arc. The premise here is that people who are physically disabled or terminally ill in the physical world can now, thanks to modern technology, live a fulfilling life in the virtual world where they are not hindered by the physical limitations of their bodies. Yet again, here we have a brilliant sci-fi concept, and this same concept has been explored in a number of highly praised works of science fiction, including of course the critically acclaimed sci-fi series Black Mirror. One of its episodes entitled San Junipero has basically the same exact premise. And with technology advancing as rapidly as it isn't too far-fetched to think that in a few years, people with physical limitations could abandon the physical world and embrace virtual reality instead. But then the question is, where do we draw the line? How long before individuals who might be perfectly healthy physically decide that they prefer the virtual world to their real lives? Some would say that a troubling percentage of people is already heading in this direction. So, how long before our society has to address the serious consequences that will emerge as a result of this shift from the physical to the virtual? These are all important and profoundly interesting questions that, if handled well, can make for some amazing science fiction. And finally, let's look at the premise for the SAO movie called Ordinal Scale. In Ordinal Scale, the setting moves from a virtual world into augmented reality, and the line between the real world and the virtual world becomes even more blurry as real physical spaces are transformed into fantastical settings through the power of augmented reality or AR. AR technology has been growing rapidly in the past 5 to 10 years, and the phenomenon of Pokemon Go back in 2016 demonstrated that the premise of Ordinal Scale is both plausible and highly interesting. Now, of course, the initial avalanche of interest that Pokemon Go generated when it first came out didn't last, and realistically, that level of hype and popularity for any game is unsustainable. Back when it first came out, the streets were literally full of people playing Pokemon Go. Children were playing together with their parents and grandparents. It was truly a phenomenon. But even though the popularity of Pokemon Go is nowhere near those initial levels, there are still a lot of people playing Pokemon Go even now, so this game was by no means a flop. And it isn't hard to imagine that as augmented reality technology advances, something like the AR MMORPG that we see in the Ordinal Scale movie could appear in our own world in the near future. So there we are again, we have a fascinating and plausible sci-fi concept that has the potential to create some amazing stories. So then why is it that despite the fact that each story arc has an intriguing and promising premise, Sword Art Online continues to receive so much hate? Even though I feel that the show's faults have been greatly exaggerated over the years, I think I know why SAO has failed to live up to its full potential thus far. While I love the science fiction elements in SAO and the initial premise of each arc, I also kind of hate the fact that the character development in SAO fails to live up to the promising premise. In order to create a great story, you need a great premise, but in order to make the story truly amazing, you also need great characters who go through meaningful development throughout the course of the series. Granted, SAO spends a lot of time on the character of Kirito and on his relationship with Asuna, which I like, and I was happy to see their relationship actually progress in a real way, something that doesn't often happen in harem anime. However, the real issue with SAO is the lack of character development for everyone else other than Kirito and Asuna, and this includes the villains. You can't fully explore a cool sci-fi premise if you don't develop your characters, because the social, economic, and philosophical impact of modern technology can only be fully explored through its effects on the characters within the story. Think for a moment about the side characters in SAO, including Lisbeth the blacksmith, Lifa the cousin, Sinone, Silica, Klein, and so on. All of these characters play an important role at some point in the story, but then after their main story arc finishes, they simply fade into the background and they're just kind of there. They're just hanging around and not doing anything too important while we focus on Kirito, Asuna, and whichever new characters are relevant in the current arc. Compare this to another shonen series, the Seven Deadly Sins or Nanatsu no Taizai. Sure, that series could have just focused on the relationship between the captain of the Sins Meliodas and his love interest Elizabeth in the same way that SAO focuses on Kirito and Asuna. But instead, the Seven Deadly Sins spends a lot of time developing the other characters, including the 6 remaining members of the Sins. Each character has their own unique backstory, and the relationships between the characters continue to grow and develop as the series goes on. Furthermore, these characters do not simply fade into the background once a new arc begins. Instead, each member of the Seven Deadly Sins has their own important role to play in the story, even now as the manga approaches chapter 300. Yui, the AI, is also a great example of SAO's failure to develop its characters. The idea of an advanced computer program becoming self-aware and developing artificial intelligence is another major theme in science fiction, and it has been explored in everything from William Gibson's Neuromancer and the Tron franchise to Ghost in the Shell and the Terminator, to name just a few. When Yui was first introduced, I loved this idea of having an AI become self-aware and begin to interact with actual people within the SAO game. But after she is initially introduced, Yui also becomes a relatively static side character who considers Kirito and Asuna to be her parents, even though they're not. Since Yui possesses superior artificial intelligence, a lot more focus could have been placed on her development, how her understanding of human beings and their relationships changes and matures. And a lot more time could have been spent on what the existence of such an advanced AI means for the society in which SAO is taking place. The fact that such an advanced AI exists, an AI that is able to interact directly with human beings, is a revolutionary technological development. And yet, Yui is relegated to a side character whose primary role seems to be to act cute and help Kirito and Asuna once in a while with technical support. And don't even get me started on the villains. Kayaba, the creator of the original SAO and Nerve Gear, seems to be interesting at first, but as we learn more about him, we realize that his character is shallow and his motivations for doing what he did make no sense. I mean, sure, we can understand why Kayaba would want to have full control of the virtual world he created. Power is definitely a strong motivator for human beings. But why did Kayaba decide that thousands of innocent people needed to die in SAO? He could have still controlled the virtual world without having anyone actually die. And even if he wanted to keep people trapped in the game, he could have held their consciousnesses captive just like Nobuyuki, aka Fairy King Oberon, does to Asuna and the others. Literally no one had to die, let alone innocent teenagers who just wanted to play a game. Kayaba eventually scans his brain and permanently transfers his consciousness into the virtual world, which is another thought-provoking sci-fi concept. But the full potential of this premise is never explored, and not much is done with Kayaba's character, even though there were so many possibilities to do more. Our boy Fairy King Oberon is also a very one-dimensional villain. He is an evil psycho who wants money and power, but other than being extremely punchable for the evil douchebag that he is, there is nothing relatable or complex about his character. What drove him to become the way that he is? What is his belief system and the true driving force behind his actions? Human beings are complicated. It is very rare for someone to just be purely evil or purely good. But there is nothing complicated about Oberon. He's just an abusive psycho who wants money and power. Other villains like Death Gun also turn out to be one-dimensional, and their motivations turn out to be pretty dubious once we learn more about them. And in the Ordinal Scale movie, the primary villain is a professor whose daughter died in the original SAO, and he wants to revive her by stealing all of the memories of her from the SAO survivors. He needs to steal the memories in order to reconstruct her personality in the virtual world, turning her into a sort of AI. But if you ask me, this entire concept makes literally no sense, since the memories that others have of the daughter could not possibly help reconstruct her true personality. The way that we see and perceive other people that we meet is completely different from the way that they see and perceive themselves. And unless you can read minds, you can't possibly know what someone else is thinking or feeling on the inside. So stealing the inherently subjective memories that SAO survivors have of his daughter could do little in terms of reconstructing the daughter's true personality. Which means that the professor's entire elaborate master plan makes very little sense to me. And this is the main issue that I have with SAO. We start off with an intriguing sci-fi premise and main characters like Kirito and Asuna that we can definitely work with, but not nearly enough effort is spent on developing the other characters or on constructing a logical and compelling plotline. Each arc consists of either Kirito or Asuna or both obtaining new skills and weapons and using them to destroy one-dimensional and forgettable villains with some minor help from the side characters. We always end up with a very simplistic dynamic of good guy Kirito versus a one-dimensional villain, and of course we know that the story will end with Kirito training, obtaining new skills or weapons, and then defeating the villain. And this is unfortunate because, as I mentioned so many times in this video, SAO has the potential to explore more complex and nuanced sci-fi themes that other anime like Ghost in the Shell and Psycho Pass have explored so successfully. And the truth is that the SAO formula may well be the future of anime. If we take a look at the surge in isekai anime in recent years, it is clear that the goal of most of these anime is to attract viewers with an intriguing premise. An ordinary person just like you ends up in a really cool fantasy world full of women who want you, and plot twist, you are also extremely powerful despite being completely new to this world. And then once they suck viewers in with the escapist power fantasy premise, they spend very little effort on character development and plot. The protagonist is always good, pure, overpowered, and a chick magnet, and of course his enemies are all evil, one-dimensional psychopaths who are defeated as soon as he finds a new, more powerful sword, or spell, or nunchucks, or whatever. This formula could be the future of anime because it's easier to produce shows of this type. It's easier to create a cool premise and then just make formulaic arcs in which the protagonist is kicking ass in roughly the same way every time, only the villains and the items being used to defeat the villains are changing. It is much harder to create a gripping and coherent overarching plotline that includes meaningful character development for all the relevant cast members, and that treats its villains as actual multi-dimensional human beings with complex thoughts, feelings, and motivations. As far as Sword Art Online goes, I think it gets more hate than it deserves, and I will definitely still watch the Alicization arc as it comes out in anime form. But SAO has the potential to be so much better, and we need to expect more from franchises like SAO. Otherwise, the future of anime will be series with intriguing concepts that never put in the work necessary to achieve their full potential. And we are going to keep seeing a bunch of bad SAO clones like Isekai wa Smartphone popping up every new anime season. At least that's my opinion, but let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with my take on SAO and the future of anime? Or do you think that I'm wrong and Isekai wa Smartphone is actually a modern classic? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video, you want to see more videos like it, leave a like to let me know. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at AnimeUproar for all the latest updates. And a big thank you to ACDesign for editing this and other videos for us. He's doing a great job. Be sure to check him out, link in the description. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya, Space Cowboys.